Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to unpack the absolutely incredible story of the Indian economy. It's a journey of massive change, of how it went from a really tightly controlled system to a major player on the world stage.
So the big question is, how did this happen? How did this transformation really happen? What were the big moments, the critical decisions, and the powerful ideas that completely reshaped the future for over 1 billion people? That's what we're going to get into. All right, before we jump in, let's just get on the same page about what an economy even is. It's funny, the word actually comes from the Greek for home management. And honestly, that's the perfect way to look at it. You've got a limited budget at home, right? You have to make choices. A country is the same thing, just on a much, much bigger scale.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1947. India is newly independent. A huge question looms. How are we going to run this place? What's the economic blueprint going to be for managing our new home?
Well, they went with something called a mixed economy. And this was a super deliberate choice, not something they just stumbled into. You got to remember the context. On one side, you had the Soviet Union and its big state-controlled plans, which looked pretty impressive to some. But on the other hand, India had just kicked out a foreign trading company that had basically ruled them. So you can imagine they were pretty wary of giving private companies too much power. The answer? A compromise. The government would handle the big stuff, the heavy industries, and the private sector could, do its thing alongside it.
And that decision really set the stage for the first big chapter in India's economic story, which we can call the era of control.
So for a long, long time, India was what you'd call a closed economy. Think of it like a house with most of its doors and windows shut to the outside world. The government was in the driver's seat for, pretty much everything. They decided what got made, where money was spent, and who was even allowed to start a business. It was very, very top-down. And the way they did this was through these famous 5-year plans. The very first one, right out of the gate, was all about agriculture. Makes sense, right? You've got to be able to feed your people. But then, pretty quickly, there was a big shift. The focus turned to heavy industry. We're talking giant steel plants, massive machinery, the whole shebang. The big idea here was to become self-reliant. India wanted to make everything it needed itself, without having to depend on anyone else.
But there was a problem. After decades of this approach, the system wasn't really working as planned. Instead of creating a strong, self-reliant nation, the economy was, it was heading for a cliff.
And that cliff was 1991. Here's how bad it got. India's foreign exchange reserves, that's basically its savings and other currencies to buy essential stuff like oil, was almost empty. They had enough money left to pay for just 2 weeks of imports. 2 weeks! Can you imagine? It's like looking at your bank account and realizing you only have enough cash to pay your rent and buy groceries for the next 14 days, and that's it. For a whole country. This was a genuine crisis. And it wasn't just one thing. It was like a perfect storm. The government was deep in debt. The Gulf War made oil prices skyrocket. The Soviet Union, a huge trading partner for India, just collapsed. And on top of all that, things were politically shaky at home. It was one blow after another, pushing the economy right to the brink.
So with its back against the wall, India had to do something. And not just a small tweak. It had to completely tear up the old rulebook and write a new one. This moment would change everything.
The solution came down to 3 big words: liberalization, privatization, and globalization. People call it the LPG reforms, an easy way to remember the blueprint for India's brand new economic direction. So let's break that down. First up, liberalization. In simple terms, this meant the government taking a step back. For decades, India had this system nicknamed the License Raj, which basically meant you needed a government permit for almost anything you wanted to do in business. It was incredibly restrictive. Liberalization got rid of a lot of that red tape, the idea being to just let businesses breathe, let them innovate, let them grow.
Then you have privatization. This one's pretty straightforward. It's about selling off government-owned companies to private players. The thinking was that private companies are often more efficient and can bring in new money and new ideas. It was a huge shift in who is driving the economy.
And the final piece of the puzzle? Globalization. This was a total 180 from the old closed-door policy. Suddenly, India was opening up. It started lowering barriers to trade, rolling out the welcome mat for foreign companies, and really connecting its economy to the rest of the world for the first time in a long time. Okay, so fast forward. After all these massive changes, how do we actually check the report card? How do we see how the economy is doing today? Well, the main number everyone looks at is GDP. And what exactly is GDP? It stands for Gross Domestic Product. The easiest way to think about it is just as a country's economic report card for the year. It's the total value of everything a country produces in a year. Every car, every software program, every cup of coffee sold. Add it all up, and that's your GDP.
Now here's a crucial little detail. There are two types of GDP, and it's super important to know the difference. Let's say you get a 5% raise at work. Awesome, right? But what if the price of gas, groceries, everything also went up by 5%? You're not actually any better off. That's the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal is just the raw number, but real GDP is adjusted for that rise in prices, for inflation. Real GDP tells us if we're actually making more stuff and growing, and that's the number economists really care about.
And if you want some real perspective on just how far India has come, get this. Back in 1868, an economist estimated that the average income per person for an entire year was just 20 rupees. 20 for a whole year. When you hear that, you start to grasp the scale of the transformation we're talking about.
So where does all this leave India on the world stage today? Well, the numbers speak for themselves. If you just look at the raw numbers, the nominal GDP, it's the 6th largest economy on the planet. But if you look at something called purchasing power parity, which is a fancy way of saying what can your money actually buy you in that country, India jumps up to the 3rd largest. That's right, number 3, a true economic giant.
So when you look back, it's just an incredible journey, isn't it? From a closed, state-run system on the verge of collapse to one of the most powerful and dynamic economies in the world. It really is an amazing transformation. And it leaves you wondering, what's next? What does the next chapter of this incredible story look like?